ability of kidneys to produce a concentrated urine is extremely important when we are in a situation that our water intake is low or our water loss is high. For example, you're excessively sweating, or you are in a place that temperature is really high, or even if you just think about the number of hours that you are sleeping. Let's say if you sleep 7-8 hours, during those 7-8 hours you're not receiving water through your diet, and clearly your body has to keep water as much as possible to maintain the blood volume and as a result maintain the blood pressure. When we make a comparison between a concentrated urine versus a dilute urine, we see that in both type of urine, kidneys eliminate those wastes and ions that they're supposed to be eliminated out of the body. The difference is the amount of water. As you can see, in a concentrated urine, the solutes and waste are more concentrated. With minimal amount of water, we get rid of this waste. But in a dilute urine, the amount of water is really high. In general, kidneys can produce a urine that is about 4 times more concentrated than blood plasma and glomerular filtrate. And as I explained, it is very important for our kidneys to have this ability. What we consume can easily affect the function of kidneys. For example, drinking alcoholic beverages or having caffeine can easily prevent kidneys from producing a concentrated urine. So we end up with losing more water. Basically, the type of urine that is produced as a result of consumption of alcohol or caffeine would be a dilute urine. To understand exactly how alcohol and caffeine impact the function of nephrons of kidneys, first we need to learn how production of a concentrated urine is going to happen. And since keeping water to maintain blood volume and blood pressure is one of the goals when we talk about concentrating urine, we cannot underestimate the power of hypothalamus, the one that controls the autonomic nervous system. Recall, as I explained in the video hypothalamus and pituitary gland, the hypothalamic neurons are the ones that produce antidiuretic hormone, and when the time comes, this hormone is released into the blood capillaries that pass through the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, and then through bloodstream, antidiuretic hormone travels to many of our systemic blood vessels and also travels to our kidneys. Also, it is important to recall that, as I explained in the video cortical nephron versus juxtamedullary nephron, between these two nephrons, the one that has a significant role in producing a concentrated urine is the juxtamedullary nephron. Juxtamedullary nephron would be the ones that they have a very long nephron loop, and also it is important to recall that when we walk through the ascending limb, the beginning of ascending limb is thin and the rest of it would be thick ascending. So knowing about this information, let's take a look at one of these nephrons. As you can see, in the descending limb of nephron loop, water reabsorption is happening. It simply means that the descending limb allow water molecules to leave the tubule, and we know that water goes into the peritubular capillaries that we have around the tubules. But when we get to the ascending limb, we see that only the thin ascending allows water reabsorption to happen. The wall of the thick ascending is not permeable to water. So in the thick ascending, the only reabsorption that is possible would be reabsorbing some solutes. And in this video, I'm going to talk about 3 important solutes that they have role in producing concentrated urine. They are sodium ion, chloride ion, and urea. When we analyze the cells that line the thick ascending, we notice that in the membrane of these epithelial cells, we have numerous numbers of sodium ion, chloride ion symporters. These protein molecules are the ones that reabsorb sodium ion and chloride ion. So that's one of the reasons that when we get to the thick ascending limb of the nephron loop, here we have a very high percentage of reabsorption of sodium ion and chloride ion. But recall that this section of the renal tubule is not permeable to water. So because of the presence of those symporters, thick ascending successfully send lots of these ions out into the interstitial fluid. So when sodium ion and chloride ion get into the interstitial fluid, we end up with a hypertonic interstitial fluid, an interstitial fluid that is very concentrated with these two ions. And we know the rule of osmosis is very simple. Water always follows the solute. Since sodium ion and chloride ion concentration is really high around the tubule, now the water molecules that we have inside the tubule really would love to leave the tubule. However, we know in the thick ascending, we cannot let water molecules to leave. So where is exactly the part of renal tubule that allows these water molecules to leave the tubule and go to this very concentrated interstitial fluid that would be mostly in collecting duct? Clearly, since the goal is to produce a concentrated urine and keep water in the body, this is the moment that antidiuretic hormone is released into the bloodstream, and at the presence of antidiuretic hormone, collecting duct and also to some extent late distal convoluted tubule both increase reabsorption of water molecules. So the story is very simple. In the thick ascending, sodium ion and chloride ion leave the tubule, make around the tubule hypertonic. Basically, they promote osmosis of water, and by releasing antidiuretic hormone, we allow water molecules to leave the collecting duct and late distal convoluted tubule. So this is one way to get water out of the tubule. The result would be eliminating less amount of water. However, there is one more solute that help concentrating urine, and that would be urea. Just imagine when we are walking down the collecting duct, since water molecules are leaving the collecting duct, the concentration of urea increases. And it is amazing that collecting duct allows urea molecules to diffuse out. I would refer to this story as urea is bluffing. The reason is urea leaves the collecting duct because it's a solute. It makes the interstitial fluid hypertonic, and we know that water molecules follow urea. What happens to water molecules after they leave the collecting duct? They are reabsorbed back into bloodstream, but urea goes back into the renal tubule. Two sections of renal tubule let urea to get back into the tubule. One would be descending limb of the nephron loop, and the other one would be the thin ascending. So that's the reason I call this bluffing. Urea leaves collecting duct, water follows urea, urea goes back into the tubule, but water molecules obviously go back into bloodstream. This process is called urea recycling, and imagine when urea gets back into the tubule, it goes through the tubule, and eventually when urea gets into the collecting duct, it leaves collecting duct again to make water molecules to follow it, and urea goes back into the tubule, water goes into the bloodstream. So urea in general pretend that it's going to reabsorption. However, we know that most of the urea molecules will be eventually eliminated from our body. So that's the reason I call this bluffing. Now that we learn how these three solutes, sodium ion, chloride ion, and urea, by leaving the renal tubule, promote osmosis of water, and clearly we need the presence of antidiuretic hormone, we can talk about the impact of caffeine. We know that we have caffeine in coffee, tea, soda. What caffeine does, it inhibits these symporters. So for a moment, imagine these sodium ion, chloride ion symporters, many of them are inhibited because of the presence of caffeine. The result would be that we do not reabsorb that much sodium ion, chloride ion in the thick ascending. And if sodium ion, chloride ion do not leave the thick ascending, clearly outside the tubule is not going to be that much hypertonic. So we end up with less reabsorption of water, and more water stays in the tubule, will be eliminated. So that's the reason when you have a few cups of coffee or tea or soda, you end up with production of more urine. And if you pay attention to the color of urine, it's a dilute urine. It's a light yellow colored urine because it contains lots of water. Alcohol has a different impact. Alcohol inhibits secretion of antidiuretic hormone. So when we do not have that much secretion of antidiuretic hormone, clearly we don't have that much reabsorption of water in the collecting duct, and the result would be water stays in the tubule and will be eliminated. And please keep in mind, both caffeine and alcohol prevent kidneys to conserve and keep water. So we end up with losing water by producing a higher volume of urine. We are moving toward dehydration. So knowing about this information, whenever we consume something that contains caffeine or alcohol, since we are losing some water, to prevent our blood volume and blood pressure to go down, we need to replace the lost water. That's why after consumption of alcohol or consumption of caffeine, the best drink that we can have is the actual water. I hope you find this helpful.